Okay, so I think I'm going to get started here. So welcome to isla study group. This is something that I set up just to give people kind of an introduction to the language and go over some different aspects of the language that people might not be familiar with, and give them some practice and other things like that. So I put a document in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it basically has some links that I've set up. And I'm actually going to go over to one of those links and open one of those up. Okay, so this is I'm not sure if you can see that. Okay, my screen is just changing over. Just want to make sure I can see the chat here. Okay, so this is a website that I've set up. This is a document that I created called the Heisla Handbook. It's a handy little kind of guide, a basic introduction to the Heisla language. So I've got an introduction here. I talk a little bit about dialects. The thing that I really focus on when I'm teaching the language is the sounds. So I've got like the first half of the handbook basically focuses on the sounds and how they work, where they come from, and things like that. So I go over the vowels first. So there's vowel combinations, which you can see a little bit here. Maybe I'll zoom in a bit more there. So there's vowel combinations, and then there's single vowels here. So one of the things that's really unique about the Haida language is that it's in terms of the sounds. Like consonant sounds will always make the same sounds, but it's the vowels that will change. And that's something that if people understand that right from the start, that's really going to help them understand the language and how it works, because the consonants sound the same all the time, but they can affect how a vowel will sound when it comes after it. So if there's a back vowel in front of an I, it'll change the sound of that I. So the letter I normally sounds like E, like in geeg. But if there's a certain consonant in front of it, it'll actually change into an A sound. So that's something that takes a little bit of getting used to, is trying to differentiate between the letter I making an E sound and an A sound. So there's things to look out for that will tell you whether which sound it's actually making. And so that's kind of what I talk about here. So basically, any of these consonants will change the sound of an I or a U. So this symbol here is called a G bar. So a G bar and an I sounds like gray, gray. An H and an I sounds like hey. This apostrophe on top of the P makes it what we call ejective. So an ejective P followed by an I sounds like pay. So if you see any of these consonants in front of an I or a U, it's going to change the sound of that vowel. Anything that's not on this in this list, it's just basically going to be a regular vowel sound. So it'll be E if it's an I, or U if it's a letter U. So I go over things like that, and then the consonants. I basically break them up into different sections. Like I start from the front of your mouth. That's where these sounds come from. And then I move back with each group, because that's basically what happens is the labial sounds that we call them come from the front of your mouth because they're made by closing your lips and then opening them. And then as you go further back, it's that's the sounds basically become deeper, and there's not as much happening in the front of your vocal tract. It's coming more from the back. And I have example words for each vowel sound. So a B is always going to sound like B. So like in baba'o, it's always going to make a B sound. So baba'o is grandfather. A P is always going to make a P sound. So a word like pu'as, which means hungry, is always going to sound like P with that P at the front. So basically, the way the orthography, the set of symbols works, is we have regular consonants, regular letters, and then we have modified versions of those letters. So we have a regular P, which sounds like P. It's just like in English, just a regular P. But when you put an apostrophe on top of it, it becomes more pronounced. So it gives it kind of a popping sound. So this word is ala, ala, which means to work. So those are some of the things that I go over in this handbook. I'll zoom out a little bit more. So the handbook starts off by going over the different sounds, different groups of sounds. And then the last half of the handbook gives you examples of different phrases and words that you might use in everyday speech. So things like the colors. I have a list of colors here. I have the different species of salmon listed here, place names, family relations. So like words for mother, father, grandfather, grandmother, things like that. Common greetings you might use or hear. And this is something that's also very unique. I have the list of numbers from 1 to 100. And this is something that I actually compiled myself, because when I was first studying the language, I couldn't find a list of numbers from 1 to 100. I found some of them, but I basically found out like what 21 was and 22. And I basically used that pattern to fill in the rest of it. So I might have had like 21 to 23. And I used those patterns to actually fill out the rest up to 29. So that's something I did myself. And it's there's a list of the numbers there. I also have a glossary. So I tend to use some of the linguistic terminology, and it can get a little bit intimidating for people who don't come from a linguistic background. But it's not really that important to understand like what an alveolar ridge is. It's more important to understand like the concept behind it. So you don't really need to know exactly what labial sounds are. It's more important to know how they work. So I tend to use some of the linguistic terminology just because it's easier for me to do that, because like I have to call them something. I can't just say like this thingamajig and that what's it and this who's it. So I tend to lean more towards the linguistic terminology. But again, I kind of give a definition of those terms here. So that's something else that can be very helpful for people. So you can use this handbook right on the website, on the webpage, because it's embedded. There's a PDF viewer here. So you can read through it there, or down here, you can actually download it. So you can download to a computer or a phone or whatever you're using, and you can view it through there, through your PDF viewer. I also have a list of videos, a video series that I've started, where I go through the handbook, each one, like one section at a time. I've recorded 12 videos so far, so I'm just over halfway through, and it really helps walk people through like how the handbook kind of works. And it was I developed it as kind of a quick guide so that I could walk people through how the orthography works and how the sounds work and things like that. And when people become familiar with it, then this handbook can serve as a reminder, can serve as like a study aid for people to remind themselves, like, oh, what are the labial sounds? Oh, let me go find those. And you can flip through it and you can see like the labial sounds are right here. If I zoom in more, then you can take a look and kind of remind yourself, give yourself a refresher of the labial sounds if you're curious about those and things like that. So, one thing I should say about this handbook is that it is still a draft. It's not finished yet. So, there's a lot of typos that I have rediscovered as I've been going through it, making the videos. There's some empty spaces that I want to fill with kind of like reminders of different aspects of the orthography and how it works and things like that. So eventually, I hope to have a chance to revise this and do some more proofreading and fix the typos and other things like that. So that's the Isla handbook, and it's on the Hybrid Orthography website. So this is the menu here. So I have the home page, which is just basically kind of an introduction to the website and what is on the website. I have a blog, which I just added a couple of days ago, where I've been adding different posts. So the first one that I created had to do with Gupskolach. So on July 1st, which was a couple of days ago, that's when the country of Canada tends to celebrate Canada Day. I like to celebrate Gupskolach Day because that's the day where the Gupskolach pole came back to the Kitimat Valley. So I've got a graphic here that I created for that occasion. I have links to the documentary, which is directed by Gil Cardinal, and it's on the NFB, National Film Board of Canada website. So this is a link to that. And then there was a follow-up video in 2007 called Totem Return and Renewal. That one's about 25 minutes, and there's a separate link to that. And there was a brochure that was given out around that time. So I basically scanned that brochure, and it's here for people to look through, and it goes over the full history of the totem pole and its journey back home. So that's pretty cool. So that's the blog. I've got resources set up here. I'll actually go to a different screen, a different tab. This is a page that I set up that has some common words that people might hear and the official spellings for those words. So if people want to look up the spelling for Gupskolach, it's here listed with a lot of other words. So I just tried to think of different words that I tend to hear fairly common on a fairly common basis. Like the first one here is aloh. Aloh. That's when I hear when people talk about the feasts that we have in the feast hall. So aloh is the chief's spokesperson. Another one is anathdahu. Anathdahu. So there's two different versions here. So when you say anathdahu by itself, it means thanks. But if you say anathdahu nugutla, I'm going to say that again. I didn't quite get it right the first time. Anathdahu nugutla. That means I thank you. So there's a distinction between anathdahu and anathdahu nugutla. So the shorter one means thanks, and the longer one means I thank you. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a little bit about how the language works. So I'm going to stop sharing my web page and I'm going to open up a Word document. And I'll show you a little bit more. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. So it should show up any second here. Okay, I'm gonna have to make a quick change here. I want to say something about font choice. The font that you use makes a big difference when you're using the Heisler language in written form. So this font is not ideal because it's what's called a sans serif font. So sans serif fonts tend to not work very well with the Heisler language. So I'm going to change this to Times New Roman. Actually, I'm going to undo that just to show you the difference. I'll paste it again. So I'll keep the original font above and I'll change the font below. So there's some things here that make a big difference in terms of the ability for people to differentiate between the symbols and read the language. So one thing here that I see is different is this symbol here. So this symbol is called a tilde L. So it's a lowercase l, and it has kind of a squiggly line through it. So that squiggly line is called a tilde. So basically, you have a lowercase l plus a tilde, and that equals, I should bring up my keyboard here, that equals a tilde L. And something else I don't really like about Word is that it tends to automatically change everything to uppercase. So one of the things about typing the language is that it's much better when we only use lowercase letters. And there's different reasons for that. But for now, this tilde L is a combination of a lowercase l and a tilde symbol. So when they combine, they look like that. So the difference between these two fonts is that this L here is kind of flat. It's just basically like a rectangle with a squiggly line going through it. Whereas this one has different points. So it has a point on the top side of the L, and then it has a point on both sides of the bottom. And you can see that if I zoom in a little bit more, actually I don't think I can, I'm maxed out, but this squiggly line, the tilde, you can see that there's more variation. It starts off as little sharp points, and then it gets wider as it gets towards the middle, and then it ends in a sharp point on the other side. So you get more definition in the symbols with the Times New Roman font. So things like that make a difference. If you look at this symbol here, this is called a barred lambda. So if I go further down here, this is a lambda. It comes from the Greek alphabet, and it makes a DL sound. So if you think of words, English words like madly, sadly, gladly, you can kind of hear, I said that with kind of a Heisler accent, just because I'm so used to making that gl sound, it tends to come out, I can't stop it sometimes. So I tend to say gladly instead of gladly, like you would in English. But it's similar to that. So if you practice the words madly, sadly, gladly, and you kind of push the D and the L together into one sound, then it sounds more like madly, sadly, gladly. So that's the lambda. It makes a DL sound. When you take that same lambda symbol and you put a line through it, it becomes a barred lambda and it makes a TL sound. So something I've noticed about some fluent speakers is when they say the last name Maitland, if you listen closely, some of them tend to say Maitland, Maitland. So that's what they're doing. They're combining that T and L into one sound. So it becomes tla. And I tend to say it myself. Again, I've gotten so used to making that tla sound that I can't stop myself from doing it. So sometimes when I try to say this name, it comes out as Maitland instead of Maitland or Maitland. Sometimes I have to practice it to get my English accent back and to say it the way people would normally say it. But this is what I was talking about before, about starting off with one symbol and then modifying it. So the lambda by itself makes a DL sound or tla. The lambda with a line through it makes a tla sound. It becomes a barred lambda. And then we have another variation where you have a lambda with a line and then an apostrophe on top. So this is basically like, there's different representations of it. Sometimes it's a T with an apostrophe and an L. Sometimes it's a T and an apostrophe separately, then an L. And this is what we call an ejective barred lambda. So it's similar to the barred lambda, where it makes that TL sound, but that apostrophe makes it more pronounced. So instead of making a tl sound, now we're saying tl. So something like, for an example, in Heislakilla, tlati. Tlati is Ulican Greece. So when you hear a fluent speaker say tlati, you'll hear that that very pronounced, kind of sharp sound at the start of it. It's almost like a clicking sound. So that is tlati. So you have the lambda by itself making a DL sound. You have the barred lambda making a TL sound. And then you have the ejective barred lambda making a more pronounced apostrophe TL sound, or T apostrophe L. So these are different representations of these sounds. So the lambda is part of the hybrid orthography, the Isla hybrid orthography that I developed about 6 years ago, somewhere around there. There's been different representations. This DL was used by Emmen Bach, who was the last recognized linguist that worked with the Haida language. There was also a DH representation that was used by another linguist named Hein Vink. So Hein Vink was the first linguist that actually worked with the Haida language in the 70s. And as a result of that, he was the first to develop a standard writing system for it. But basically what happened was that I took a look at all of the pre-existing writing systems for the Haida language, and I kind of weighed the pros and cons of all of them. So basically what I decided was that Emmen Bach's second orthography, he developed more than one. His second ortho is the basis of the hybrid orthography that I developed. It's mostly Emmen Bach's second orthography. I would say it's about 95%. The difference is how I represent these sounds. the lambda sound, which I switched over. So it used to be DL with Bach. I switched it over to this lambda symbol. And the lambda symbol was used before. It was actually used by Lincoln and Rath. They came after Heinvink in the mid 80s. So they were the first ones to actually use this. Whoops, that's the wrong symbol. That's the tilde L. They were the first ones to use the lambda symbol. So I'll just put LR here for Lincoln and Rath. So the reason I decided to use this lambda symbol was because it's one symbol. And that is something that's very common in linguistics. I'm not a linguist myself. I have had some training, but in linguistics, there tends to be a common way of dealing with more kind of unique sounds like these ones that we have in our language. So using two separate symbols or two separate consonants can be a bit of a problem, because what happens is that if somebody doesn't understand the writing system, they tend to read these as two separate symbols, two separate sounds. So that can become an issue when people are reading a word with these two separate symbols. Whereas if you have one symbol, it's representing one sound. So there's no possibility of mistaking it for anything else. So that's why I ultimately decided to adopt these symbols. So there's basically these four symbols together. So the tilde L, which used to be an LH in Bach's orthography. So just to use an example here, LH can work if it's at the beginning of a word. So something like slow. This can be, it can work if it's at the beginning of a word. But if we're looking at a Heisler word that has this LH in the middle of it, so something like huslap, huslap. If people aren't used to reading Emma Bach's orthography, this might happen. They might separate that L and the H, and they might say hul hop, because they're reading these as two separate symbols, two separate sounds. And I've seen this happen. I've seen people do this. I've heard people look at this word spelled the way Emma Bach would spell it and say hul hop. And that's not the correct pronunciation. And it's due to the use of two separate consonants, two separate symbols to represent the one sound. Whereas if we replace this, if we use the, oops, gotta pop up here. So if we replace this with one symbol, now there's no way to separate them, that sound. It's one symbol that's representing one sound. And if you know this tilde L makes a sound, then you read this and you know that it sounds like huslap, huslap. So that is ultimately why I decided to incorporate these symbols here, these four symbols, to represent these unique sounds in the Heisler language. So it might be a little bit confusing for people who are just seeing them for the first time, but these serve a purpose. These are what I call preventative measures. These are used to prevent future misinterpretations from happening. And that's a big part of the way that I think about the language and thinking about learning language and teaching language. those are things that I'm basically thinking about the majority of the time. I'm thinking about how to learn the Haida language, how I've learned it, and I'm thinking about how to teach it. And I find that using one symbol to represent one sound is really effective. It's just a matter of teaching people to associate the sounds with these symbols. And that comes with practice. The more you see them, the more you practice it, the, the more, the easier it'll get for you. So that's what I find is very effective in learning the language and teaching it. I'm a really big proponent of consistency. So this single symbol representing this single sound, this gets consistent results, whereas the two symbols representing one sound is inconsistent. For the reason that I just went over, people tend to separate them and see them as two separate sounds. So that's inconsistent. Whereas if you look at this one symbol, you associate it with the one sound, that's consistent. So that's a big part of my teaching method. And I'm hoping that's going to help people understand the language more. So going back to this phrase here, we can kind of read this as two separate words. There's different parts to this word. Something else that takes some getting used to is that a word like this is one single word. It's basically like a complete sentence in a word. So the Haida language is what we call polysynthetic. So basically what this means is that there are many parts of words that are put together to make words. Many parts put together. So this anathta, this is actually a couple of different parts of words. I'm not exactly sure where it would be separated, but somewhere around there. You can think of it as like anath is one part of the word, and then dah. So this dah basically means like to speak, to say something. I'm not exactly sure what this anath part means, but dah I know means to speak. It has something to do with speaking. This nug part is also a separate part of the word. So basically this is nugwa, but we're dropping the A. And then this letter U here, this U, it means you. And this tla part, I'm not exactly sure what it means. I think it's kind of related to the U, where it kind of refers to like another person. So when you put all these parts of words together, they do form one single word. And we get rid of this A. So this anathta nugutla, it basically means like, if you took it in the most literal sense, it would mean something more like, I say to you, thanks. That's the way I would define it. That would be the most literal definition of it. But we tend to just say like, I thank you. It's a little bit easier to think of that. But if you're thinking of things in the most literal term, anathta nugutla would mean something more like, I say to you, thanks. So that's a quick look at how the language works. That's the kind of mechanics of the language. And that's different. That's the thing that's different about how I teach it. Because I really believe that in order to learn a language, you really need to understand how it works. So that's why I tend to spend a lot of time going into the sounds, how to make the sounds, and also how the words are created and the sentence structure and things like that. So not sure if you had any questions about that, but we've got a little bit of time here, a few minutes. If you do have any further questions about the language, if you want me to expand on anything a little bit more, or if there's anything else on your mind.
Um, Thank you so much for sharing. I didn't know about this website. I've been looking at that there's another website I think you created that I've been using, like the word lists and stuff and the
Mhm.
SoundClouds and stuff.
Yeah,
Um, so this is super helpful. I'm excited to go through your videos and stuff too.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I've I think I've been saying thank you wrong for a long time. I also learned another way to say thank you. That's something like ualat and I wrote down somewhere that there's like another way to say thank you that maybe I'm saying it wrong this whole time. But
Yeah, it's Owalak Tequithkins.
okay, yeah, didn't get that one right.
Yeah, Owala Tequithkins.
Oh, okay.
I would interpret that to mean something like "I really thank you" or "I really say
Okay.
thanks to you." Owala means
Okay.
really.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, this is super helpful. I use a lot of the word lists, and sometimes it's hard to understand like how all the letters sound. That
Mhm,
clicking when I don't know how to make that noise.
mhm.
Um, the TL with the apostrophe.
Yeah,
That one seems really hard to me.
yeah.
Yeah.
It just takes practice, like, and also having somebody explain to you how the sounds are made is really helpful too. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking now that maybe I'll add a wallet to Queethkins to the website, so you can
Mhm.
find that later on. So right now I
Yeah.
just have the words listed. Eventually I'm going to add recordings too, so that people can actually hear how the words sound, and you can listen to
Mhm.
them over and over again and practice. So I think that's going to
Yeah,
be
that'd
really
be awesome.
helpful.
Yeah. And are you gonna do these sessions every week? I just saw
Yes.
about it. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Hmm. And since I'm recording this, what I'll do is I'll upload this to YouTube later on, and then I'll post it on my Facebook page. And then
Okay.
people who weren't able to join in tonight, or you can go back and watch it over again. And I think that's going to be pretty helpful too.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. You're welcome. And I will say, Anathzach Nugutla Kun Aka, which basically means thank you for coming.
Awesome.
Wah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.